My boss crawled under my desk and whispered, "Act natural, just keep working." Then I heard the hum of the server tower under my desk was the only warning I had before a hand caught the fabric of my jeans near the knee, using it for balance. I didn't flinch. I just stopped typing. The air in the cramped administrative back office of the Chelsea, New York Art Gallery was already heavy with the smell of old paper ozone and impending rain from the open window. But the sudden rustle of fabric shifted the atmosphere entirely. I looked down, keeping my chin level. Clara Vance, the gallery director and technically my boss, was on her hands and knees beneath my workstation. She wore a crisp white button-down blouse and a dark tailored pencil skirt, and the sharp lines of her usual executive armor thrown badly out of place by the fact that she was wedged between my shins and a metal filing cabinet. Her dark hair was escaping its normally flawless updo. She tilted her head back, looking up at me. The ambient light from my dual monitors caught the sharp exhaustion around her eyes. "Act natural," she whispered, her voice barely carrying over the whir of the cooling fans. "Just keep working." The heavy oak door to the back office rattled. The brass handle turned, but the deadbolt, which I had instinctively flipped an hour ago when the tension in the building spiked, held firm. "Allison?" A voice filtered through the heavy wood. It was Victor, the senior board member. His tone possessed that specific, polished cadence of a man who used bureaucracy as a weapon. "Are you in there? The preliminary auditors are asking for the Q3 disbursement logs." I looked at the lock. Then I looked down at Allison. Her fingers tightened on the fabric of my jeans, a grounding gesture that broadcast a sudden, sharp spike of panic. I am a forensic accountant. My entire career is built on reading what people try to hide in ledgers, but the physical tells are always the same. She was cornered. I leaned forward in my gray cotton t-shirt, resting my elbows on the edge of the laminate desk, effectively blocking anyone's view of the floor if the door were to somehow open. I placed my hands over the keyboard. "She's not in here, Victor," I called out. My voice was measured, projecting the flat, structured calm of a man entirely absorbed in pivot tables and data reconciliation. A pause on the other side of the door. "Luca, open the door. I need to check the main terminal." "I'm in the middle of a continuous forensic extraction," I replied, my fingers moving over the keys, entering a command sequence to pull the actual routing data Victor was trying to bury. If I break the chain of custody on this data pull, the entire software suite has to restart. "It's a 6-hour protocol. Do you want to explain the delay to the oversight committee, or should I?" The silence from the hallway stretched. Victor understood leverage. He didn't understand the software I was using, which was my greatest advantage. "Have her call me the second you see her," Victor snapped. The sound of his expensive leather shoes receded down the hardwood hallway. I waited until the rhythmic tapping of his footsteps faded completely. I didn't move my chair back. The proximity was a functional necessity, but the sudden quiet in the room was heavy. I looked back under the desk. "He's gone," I said quietly. Clara let out a shaky exhale. It wasn't a sigh of relief. It was the sound of a structural support taking on too much weight. She didn't move to get up immediately. She just rested her forehead against the edge of the metal desk frame. "He changed the passwords to the offshore escrow accounts," she said, her voice hollow. "I went into his office to find the physical ledger while he was on a call. He came back early. If he had seen me in the hallway holding this..." She shifted her weight, revealing a blue, leather-bound notebook clutched against her chest. It was the offline ledger. The one piece of physical evidence that proved the gallery's missing funds weren't a result of her mismanagement, but of Victor's deliberate skimming. "Come up here," I said, my tone shifting from professional barrier to quiet instruction. I pushed my chair back a few inches, giving her room. She scrambled out from under the desk, smoothing down her skirt with jerky, anxious motions. She stood by the window, the gray afternoon light washing out her features. She was 37 to 8 years my senior and carried the gallery on her back. When she hired me 3 weeks ago to fix a minor discrepancy, in the books she hadn't realized she was walking into a sophisticated embezzlement trap designed to force her out and sell the prime real estate out from under the artists. He has the board convinced the leak is coming from my terminal, Clara said, dropping the blue ledger onto my desk. Her hands were trembling slightly. She pressed them flat against the laminate surface to steady them. The preliminary audit starts on Wednesday. If I can't prove he routed the gallery's endowment into that shell company by then, I don't just lose my job, Luca. The board will press charges to cover their own liability. I didn't offer a sympathetic grimace. Pity was useless currency. Instead, I reached out and pulled the blue ledger toward me. The leather was worn. I flipped it open, my eyes scanning the handwritten columns, numbers, dates, signatures. He's arrogant, I noted, tracing a line of ink with the cap of my pen. He kept a shadow book because he doesn't trust digital encryption. He thinks analog is untraceable. Is it? She asked, stepping closer to my shoulder to look at the page. The faint scent of bergamot and rain hovered in the space between us. Everything leaves a footprint, I said, pulling up a blank spreadsheet on my right monitor. He wrote down the dates of the transfers. I just need to cross-reference these dates with the server's network activity logs. If I can match the exact timestamp of his local logins to the outward wire transfers we have him, how long will that take? There are 4,000 lines of network traffic per day, I said, typing a rapid VLOOKUP formula to sort the raw data. I have to build a custom query to filter out the noise. Give me 48 hours. Clara looked at the monitor, then down at me. The frantic energy in her posture began to settle, replaced by a deep, anchoring focus. We only have until Wednesday morning. If Victor realizes this ledger is missing, he'll accelerate the board vote. Then we work here, I said. I didn't ask her to leave. I didn't tell her it would be fine. I stated the logistical reality. Lock the door. Pull the blinds. We don't leave this office until the data matches the ink. She nodded once a sharp, decisive movement. She walked to the window and pulled the heavy blackout shades down, plunging the room into the artificial glow of the monitors. The chaotic noise of the city outside vanished, leaving only the steady hum of the servers and the rhythmic clicking of my keyboard. The room went quiet, effectively blocking out the world. For the next 6 hours, we didn't speak a word that wasn't strictly necessary. The process of forensic reconciliation is brutally tedious. It requires a calibration mindset, comparing microscopic digital footprints against physical reality. I ran the first batch of network logs, the screen filled with green text scrolling violently before snapping into a static grid. Clara sat in the armchair across the room, reviewing the gallery's vendor contracts, searching for the fake shell company names Victor might have used. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was the functional, steadying connection of two people carrying the same heavy beam. At 9 p.m., the rain finally broke, lashing against the glass behind the shades. I rubbed the back of my neck, feeling the rigid tension in my muscles. I hit execute on the third data parsing script and watched the progress bar crawl to 12%. It would take 20 minutes to run. I pushed away from the desk and stood up. The joints in my knees popped. I walked over to the small kitchenette in the corner of the office, filled a glass with water from the cooler, and turned around. Clara had fallen asleep. She was curled into the corner of the leather armchair, her knees pulled up a stack of vendor invoices resting on her lap. Her breathing was slow, the deep exhaustion of the past 3 weeks finally pulling her under. I stood there for a moment, the cold glass in my hand. I am a man who categorizes the world into assets and liabilities. The sudden urge to make the room easier on her was a catastrophic variable. I compartmentalized it immediately. Personal feelings in the middle of a war zone were a distraction. What she needed was not romance. She needed a shield. I walked over quietly. I didn't touch her. I carefully slid the vendor invoices off her lap and placed them on the side table so they wouldn't fall. I took my gray hoodie from the back of my chair and draped it over her shoulders, blocking the draft from the window. I went back to my desk, picked up my phone, and turned it face down on the laminate surface. I gave the dual monitors my full, undivided attention. I had a deadline, and failure was an unacceptable metric. By Tuesday morning, the air in the office was stale, smelling of cold coffee and printer toner. Line 402, I said, my voice raspy. Clara was instantly beside my desk, holding a cup of terrible break room coffee. She leaned in her eyes, tracking my cursor. August 14th. I pointed to the screen. A wire transfer of $45,000 out of the main endowment fund. The recipient is listed as Apex Logistics. Apex Logistics. Clara repeated, setting the coffee down. She flipped open the blue ledger to the corresponding date. Here. Victor wrote down Apex, but look at the routing number he scribbled in the margin. I typed the routing number into my secure terminal. The database queried for 3 seconds before throwing a flag. It's an out-of-state account in Delaware, I confirmed. Now look at the network log for that exact timestamp. I highlighted a string of IP addresses. At the exact minute the wire transfer was initiated, the command didn't come from your terminal. It came from a MAC address ending in 7B4F. Is that Victor's computer? She asked, her voice tight. No, I said, leaning back. It's his personal tablet. He logged into the gallery's secure Wi-Fi using his executive credentials, bypassed the firewall, and initiated the transfer from his iPad while sitting in the boardroom. We have the digital footprint, connecting the offshore account directly to his physical device. Clara stared at the screen. The weight of the impending ruin began to lift, replaced by the sharp edge of vindication. We have him. A sharp knock on the door shattered the quiet room. Clara. It was Felix, the gallery curator. His voice was frantic. I unlocked the door and pulled it open. Felix stood there, his colorful scarf askew, his face pale. The auditors are here, Felix said, breathless. They weren't supposed to arrive until tomorrow, but Victor called them in early. They are in the main lobby, demanding access to the servers. Clara's posture went rigid. The timeline had just collapsed. If they get into the servers before we compile the final report, Victor will use his administrative access to wipe the network logs. He's forcing the audit to destroy the evidence. Felix stopped hard enough that his scarf slipped sideways, and the stale office air seemed to thicken around his fast, shallow breathing. Clara's gaze snapped to the door, her hands closing into fists as the next move in the room changed from preparation to delay. I didn't panic. Panic was an inefficient use of adrenaline. Felix, I said, my voice dropping an octave, establishing absolute authority. Go back to the lobby. Offer them coffee. Tell them the server is running a routine weekly backup and will be locked for exactly 12 minutes. Delay them. Felix nodded rapidly and practically sprinted down the hall. I turned to Clara. I need to lock the network logs behind an encrypted partition so Victor can't delete them from his terminal. I need 4 minutes. Do it, she said, stepping back to give me space. I sat down, my fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard. I didn't use the standard gallery software. I pulled up a command line interface. I isolated the specific server directory containing the Wi-Fi logs and the offshore routing traces. I initiated a 256-bit encryption wrap, locking the files behind a key that only I possessed. A progress bar appeared. Encrypting. 40%. Luca, Clara said softly. I glanced at her. She was standing by the window, her arms crossed tight over her chest. The fearless executive facade had cracked just a fraction. If this fails, she said, her voice unsteady, I don't just lose the gallery. I lose the artists who depend on me. I lose everything I've built for 15 years. Her shoulders dropped a fraction, the cold light from the monitor catching the strain she could no longer hide. And when her voice thinned on the last word, the room stopped feeling like a control center and started feeling like the edge of a collapse. She wasn't asking for comfort. She was placing the full cost of failure in plain view. I stopped looking at the monitor. I stood up across the short distance between us and stopped exactly 2 feet away. I didn't reach for her. I didn't try to pull her into a comforting embrace that would blur the lines of our professional survival. Instead, I held her gaze with absolute, unyielding certainty. It's not going to fail, I said, my voice a quiet anchor in the chaotic room. I have the data. I have the ledger. I am the only one with the encryption key. He cannot touch you, Clara. I won't let him. She looked at my face, searching for a crack in my confidence. She found none. The tremor in her shoulders slowly stopped. The transfer of stability was complete. "Okay," she breathed, nodding once. "Okay, ding." The monitor flashed green. "Encryption complete. Let's go meet the auditors," I said, grabbing a flash drive and plugging it into the tower to pull a copy of the encrypted package. We walked out of the back office and down the long hallway toward the main gallery floor. The walls were lined with stark, brilliant contemporary canvases, the legacy Clara was fighting to protect. We reached the lobby. 3 auditors in gray suits were standing near the reception desk. Victor was with them, his arms crossed, projecting an aura of concerned leadership. When he saw us, his eyes narrowed. "Ah, Clara," Victor said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. The auditors decided to come in early to expedite the process. Given the irregularities, we felt it was best to secure the servers immediately. "Of course," Clara said, her voice perfectly level. The panic from the back office was gone, replaced by the cool competence of a woman who knew she held the winning hand. We welcomed the transparency. The lead auditor, a stern woman with a clipboard, stepped forward. "Ms. Romero, we need administrative access to the main terminal to begin downloading the Q3 disbursement logs." "Certainly," I interjected, stepping slightly in front of Clara to take the operational heat. "I'm Luca Montgomery, the independent forensic accountant retained by the gallery. I've already prepared the server for your extraction." Victor's head snapped toward me. "Independent, you were hired to assist the bookkeeping staff, Montgomery. You don't have authorization to prep the servers. I have authorization from the director," I stated, pulling a single sheet of paper from my folder and handing it to the lead auditor. "This is a formal chain of custody document. At 9:14 a.m. today, I isolated the network activity logs and the Q3 disbursements into a read-only encrypted partition to prevent accidental data corruption during the audit. Here is the access key." I handed the auditor the flash drive. Victor's face went completely still. The polished mask slipped, revealing the cold calculation beneath. "You encrypted the network logs. Standard forensic procedure." "Victor," I said, my tone polite but edged with steel, "it ensures that no one, not even an administrator, can alter the data footprint prior to the auditor's review. I'm sure you agree that data integrity is our highest priority." He couldn't argue without looking guilty in front of the auditors. He forced a tight, rigid smile. "Of course, very thorough." The auditor plugged the flash drive into her laptop. "Thank you, Mr. Montgomery. This makes our job much easier. We will begin the review." "We will be in the boardroom," Clara said, taking control of the narrative. "Please let us know when you require our statements." She turned and walked toward the glass-walled boardroom. I followed her. The battle wasn't over. Encrypting the data only bought us time. The auditors still had to review it, and Victor still held a massive amount of social leverage over the gallery's board of directors. He would try to spin the data. He would try to claim his iPad was stolen or that the IP address was spoofed. We spent the next 4 hours in the boardroom. The tension was a living thing pacing the room with us. Clara organized physical contracts, preparing for the inevitable showdown. I sat at the long mahogany table, building a physical timeline on a whiteboard, connecting the blue ledger dates to the digital wire transfers. At 2 p.m., my phone buzzed. An email from the lead auditor. "Mr. Montgomery, we have found several anomalies matching your encrypted report. We are convening an emergency meeting with the executive board at 3 p.m. to present our initial findings. Your presence is required." I showed the screen to Clara. She stood up, smoothing her skirt. "This is it. He's going to try to intimidate you in front of the board." I said, erasing the whiteboard to leave no trace of our strategy. "He'll use his tenure to make you look hysterical or incompetent." "Let him try," she said, her chin lifting. At 3 p.m., the heavy doors of the boardroom opened. The 5 members of the executive board filed in looking grave. Victor walked in last, taking his seat at the head of the table. He looked composed. He had clearly formulated a defense. The lead auditor stood at the front, projecting a spreadsheet onto the screen. "Ladies and gentlemen," the auditor began, her voice crisp, "upon reviewing the encrypted network logs provided by Mr. Montgomery, we have identified a pattern of unauthorized wire transfers totaling $420,000 routed to a shell company in Delaware. A murmur of shock rippled through the board members. The transfers were initiated from an internal IP address. The auditor continued. However, the MAC address associated with the initiating device does not belong to the director's terminal. It belongs to a registered personal device. Victor leaned forward, folding his hands on the table. This is highly concerning. It appears our network has been compromised by an external hacker spoofing internal credentials. I've been warning the board about our lax cybersecurity for months. It wasn't a hacker, Victor, Clara said. Her voice cut through the room, clear and authoritative. She didn't look at me for permission. She didn't look at the board for approval. She looked directly at Victor. She opened her folder and slid a photocopy of a page from the ledger across the polished wood. That is a photocopy of a physical ledger we recovered from your office yesterday, Clara stated. It details the exact dates, amounts, and offshore routing numbers of the missing funds, written in your handwriting. The board members stared at the paper. This is absurd. Victor scoffed, his voice rising in volume. That could be anyone's handwriting. This is a desperate fabrication by a director who is clearly trying to cover her own incompetence. He pointed a finger at her. You are out of your depth, Clara. You always have been. You're emotional, you're erratic, and you're trying to frame me to save your own skin. It was a classic escalation tactic. Make it personal, raise the volume, force the opponent to react defensively. I didn't yell. I didn't match his volume. I simply produced the documentation that ended the argument. I stood up, holding a bound stack of paper. I walked around the table and placed it directly in front of the oldest board member. That is a certified diagnostic report from the gallery's secure Wi-Fi router. I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. Pure, cold data. It proves that the device used to initiate the fraudulent transfers was connected to the network via Victor's personal executive login credentials. Furthermore, page 3 contains a digital receipt from a cloud backup server. It shows that Victor uploaded a photograph of the physical blue ledger to his personal cloud account last Tuesday. I looked down at Victor. His face was the color of ash. You didn't just write it down, I said softly, ensuring the entire room heard the finality in my tone. You backed it up. The forensic footprint is absolute. You are the thief. The room went dead silent, the kind of silence that follows a structural collapse. The oldest board member looked from the report to Victor. Victor, is this true? Victor opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at the auditor, he looked at the report, and then he looked at me. He realized with sudden, terrifying clarity that he was trapped in a box built of his own data. The gallery's legal counsel has already been notified, Clara said, taking the final step. She didn't gloat. She was a professional excising a tumor. The board will vote immediately on a motion for your termination and the referral of these documents to the authorities. I suggest you call your lawyer. 10 minutes later, Victor was escorted from the building. The board voted unanimously to terminate him and freeze his assets pending a legal investigation. The audit would continue, but the focus had shifted entirely. Clara was cleared. We walked out of the boardroom together. The adrenaline crash hit the moment the heavy doors closed behind us. We stopped in the middle of the empty hallway. The late afternoon sun broke through the clouds, casting long golden shadows across the hardwood floor. Clara leaned back against the wall, closing her eyes. I stood in front of her, the space between us charged, not with panic, but with the profound, quiet relief of surviving the storm. I kept my hands at my sides. The urge to touch her, to pull her against me and feel the reality of our victory was a physical ache. But I am a man of structure. I do not cross boundaries without permission. She opened her eyes and looked at me. The defensive executive armor was completely gone. What remained was the brilliant, exhausted woman who had just fought for her life and won. You didn't just fix the books, Luca, she said, her voice soft. You stood in front of him. You didn't let him speak over me. He was relying on intimidation, I said, my voice dropping lower. Data doesn't care about volume. Neither do I. She pushed off the wall and took a step toward me. The distance closed to a matter of inches. I looked down at her hand, then up to her eyes. Thank you, she said the words. A quiet promise. I didn't say you're welcome. I didn't brush it off. I brought my own hand up and covered hers, pressing it gently against my chest, locking the connection in place. Anytime, I said. 4 days later, the gallery held its quarterly exhibition opening. The space was transformed. The harsh fluorescent lights of the audit were gone, replaced by warm, dramatic gallery lighting. A string quartet played in the corner. The room was packed with patrons, artists, and board members. I stood near the back wearing a dark suit, holding a glass of sparkling water. I watched Clara work the room. She was in her element, radiant in a dark green dress, speaking passionately about the art on the walls. She was safe. The gallery was safe. My contract was technically finished. I checked my watch. It was time to go.